My wife cheated, but what happened when I got my revenge? You won't believe it. The morning sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, as if an invisible artist gently painted golden lines on the walls of our bedroom. The air still carried the aroma of coffee that Alice always brewed before I woke up. I had slept in a little later than usual, and for the first few moments, everything felt ordinary, calm, even perfect. But something about this morning was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt it, a sense that the day would bring the unexpected. I got up slowly, stretching, and my eyes landed on her phone lying on the nightstand next to her side of the bed. The screen lit up, and without thinking, I glanced at it. A message. One word. And my entire world began to crack. Thanks for last night, love. My heart skipped a beat. My fingers grew cold, and for a moment, I thought it must be some mistake. Surely, it was just a spam message, I reasoned. But there was a number attached to the text. A man's number. Something told me this mistake was far too personal to be random. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the screen, my hands trembling. Finally, almost mechanically, I clicked on the message. What I saw next shattered me. A thread of dozens of messages filled with words that had once been spoken only to me. You were incredible. Can't wait for next time. Remember how you laughed last night? That was the best part of my week. Each word cut through me like a blade. Could I have imagined that the woman I shared my life with was living another life beyond our walls? This was the moment when everything I believed to be true turned to ashes. The kitchen. Her voice drifted in from there. Light, melodic, familiar. She was humming a tune, seemingly carefree. I heard her cups clink as she poured coffee, just as she always did for the two of us. Her innocence at that moment terrified me more than the messages themselves. Alice appeared in the doorway, her face glowing with a genuine smile. She handed me a cup. "Good morning, love," she said, her voice warm and tender. She seemed like the same Alice I'd always known. But now, I wasn't sure who she really was. I silently picked up her phone without a word. The screen lit up again, and I turned it toward her. Her smile vanished. She froze in place, holding her cup like a shield. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I didn't see fear or shame, just a cold determination. "What's this?" I asked, calm, almost quiet. But that calm was deceptive. Inside me, a storm was brewing, ready to erupt. Alice tried to look away, but I didn't let her. Her usually steady voice now quivered. It's not what you think," she said, taking a step back. "Really? Then what is it?" "Explain," I said, my voice as cold as a blade. Her lips trembled slightly, but she didn't answer. Instead, she tried to change the subject, deflecting, confusing, avoiding the truth. I couldn't listen anymore. My world had crumbled into 1,000 shards. Struggling to gather my thoughts, I stormed out of the house, leaving her standing there with the cup of coffee she seemed not to notice. The street was quiet. The wind brushed against my face, but it brought no relief. Anger and pain swirled in my mind like a tempest. I thought about how long this had been going on, how much of what we built together was a lie. But the question that burned the most was, why? Why had she done it? That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered the streets as the city slumbered. An idea began to take shape in my mind. I couldn't just let this go. I had to do something. And now, I knew. I wouldn't just uncover the truth. I would make her feel what I felt. Revenge became the only thought that kept me afloat. All night, I wrestled with questions. How long had it been going on? Who was he? And most importantly, why? I couldn't let her wriggle out of this, but starting a scene seemed pointless. I needed answers. Not just words, proof, facts, the truth, no matter how brutal. The next morning, I knew what to do. An old acquaintance had mentioned a private investigator they'd hired in a similar situation. His name was Mark, a man who worked discreetly, quickly, and without unnecessary questions. I dialed his number, and within hours, we were sitting at a quiet cafe table where no one could overhear us. "Well, lay it out," Mark began, studying me intently. His voice was steady, but his gaze pierced through me. He had seen men like me dozens, if not hundreds of times before. Men broken and betrayed. My wife. She's cheating, I said, gripping my coffee cup as if it could contain the emotions threatening to spill out. I found messages. And I want to know who, how long, everything. Mark nodded, not asking unnecessary questions. All right. Give me her schedule, any suspicions, and every detail you can. I'll find out everything. I handed him a list of places Alice frequented, her friends, even a photo of the message from that morning. Deep down, a faint glimmer of hope remained. Maybe this really was a misunderstanding, but something inside me already knew the truth. The days dragged on like an eternity. Alice acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, said the usual phrases, but every glance from her seemed fake. I noticed details I hadn't before. How often she checked her phone, how she sometimes disappeared for meetings I knew nothing about. A week later, Mark called. We need to talk, he said. His voice was serious, even slightly concerned. My heart raced as I drove to his office, pounding like a drum. Your wife has been meeting with one man multiple times over the past few days, he began, laying out photos in front of me. Each shot was like a blow to the heart. Alice leaving a restaurant, her hand resting on the shoulder of a tall man in a dark coat. They were laughing, touching each other. Who is he? I asked, clenching my fists. Mark nodded toward another photo. That's Jordan Raymond, an old acquaintance of yours, isn't it? Mark's words felt like a cold shower. Jordan. The same Jordan who had been my friend since college. I hadn't seen him in years, but our history was deeply intertwined. We fell out after a huge fight, and I thought it was forever. Now he was back, in my life, in my family, in my marriage. Mark continued, this isn't just a casual fling. Their meetings are regular, and they spend a lot of time together in places where they think no one will see them. My head was spinning. Why him? Was it intentional? To prove something to me? To get revenge? Alice knew about my history with Jordan. Could she be using this as a way to hurt me even more? That night, I couldn't sleep. I knew I had to act carefully. If I caused a scene, it would only make things worse. But I needed to find out. Was this just an affair, or was it something much deeper? Was this a plan directed against me? And most importantly, how far was I willing to go to stop it? The phone in my pocket buzzed, pulling me out of my daze. Jordan's number flashed on the screen. After everything I had seen, I was ready to explode, but I forced myself to answer. His voice on the other end sounded confident, even slightly smug, as always. Hey, buddy. Long time no see. I think we need to meet, he said, as if it were just a friendly suggestion to grab coffee. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Why was he calling? Did he know that I already knew? I had to keep my emotions in check, though anger and pain burned inside me. Meet? I forced myself to speak calmly, even coldly. Interesting. Where and when? Tomorrow, at our old spot. His voice sounded almost cheerful. You remember, don't you? The bar where we spent so much time. 6 o'clock. I agreed, though my hands trembled with suppressed rage. I had 24 hours to decide how to handle this. Blow up or stay composed. Confront him or let him know he had destroyed my life. The next day, I arrived at the bar early. I sat in a corner where I had a good view of the place and ordered whiskey. My thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm. Memories of our friendship, his betrayal, Alice. I rehearsed every word I planned to say, but none of the lines felt like enough. The door opened, and Jordan walked in. He was just as I remembered him, confident, with that same smug smile. But now, that smile filled me with nothing but disgust. Hey, old man, he exclaimed, walking up to my table. He sat down across from me without even asking and gestured to the waiter. 2 whiskeys, please. Just like old times. I stayed silent while he ordered. It felt like I was watching a predator preparing to attack. Did he know that I knew? Or was this just part of his game? So, you decided to call after all these years, I said when the waiter placed a fresh glass in front of me. What happened? Feeling nostalgic? Jordan smiled, but there was something else in his eyes. You know, the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how hard we try to escape it. I leaned closer. Maybe you want to talk about what you've been catching up to in my life? He met my gaze and hesitated for a second. His smile faded. and he took a sip of whiskey as if bracing himself to say something important. Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But let me explain, he began. His voice was soft, but his words felt like a blade cutting into me. Explain? Explain what? How you started an affair with my wife. Or how you looked me in the eye while betraying our friendship. I couldn't hold back my anger any longer. It wasn't as simple as you think, Jordan replied, gripping his glass. I didn't seek this out. It just happened. It just happened? I barely held myself back from hitting him. You say that like you accidentally tripped and fell into my life. He leaned forward, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. Do you think I wanted this? Alice came to me. She said you changed, that you stopped noticing her. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. Was it true? Or just an excuse? I remembered every moment Alice and I argued, every time I was consumed by work and ignored her. But that didn't justify what she did, and it certainly didn't excuse him. You think that's an excuse? I stood up, unable to sit any longer. You took everything from me. My friendship, my family. You destroyed me behind my back, and now you're trying to explain it away? Jordan looked up at me, his face serious. I didn't want to destroy you, but you gave me the opportunity. His words made me freeze. What did that mean? He didn't look away, as if he were challenging me to a duel. When Jordan spoke his final words, the bar fell into a deathly silence. You gave me the opportunity. His voice was calm, but it radiated coldness. I stood there, thunderstruck, trying to make sense of what he meant. My heart pounded so hard that the sound of blood rushing through my temples drowned out everything else. What are you trying to say? I asked, struggling to suppress my anger. My voice betrayed me, rasping like a broken record. Jordan leaned forward and took a sip of his whiskey, as if savoring my confusion. Do you remember our university years? He began, as if this were just a friendly chat. What exactly are you trying to remind me of? I locked eyes with him, but he just smiled. There was something predatory in that smile. You were always the one who won, who had everything. You were the golden boy, and everyone knew it. Even her, your Alice. She was in love with me first, but you showed up and ruined it all. His words cut like a knife. University. I remembered when Jordan and I first met, how we'd hang out and have fun, but I never suspected he might have had feelings for Alice. She had been part of our group, but it was me she started dating, and later, married. Are you serious? Are you telling me all of this is revenge for something that happened over 10 years ago? I could barely hold back from shouting. Jordan shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. Maybe. Or maybe it's just justice. You took what should have been mine. Now, I've taken it back. Alice isn't a thing. She made a choice, and that choice wasn't you. I raised my voice, but Jordan stayed calm. His calmness only fueled my rage. Is that what you think? Are you sure she's still choosing you? Think about it. Why did she come to me? Why did she open up to me so easily? Maybe it's not just about me. Maybe you're the reason she wanted something else. Those words were the last straw. I grabbed Jordan by the collar and lifted him out of his seat. People in the bar began to turn, some even pulling out their phones to record. Say one more word about my wife, and My words trailed off as Jordan started laughing. Hit me if you want, he said through his laughter. But it won't change the fact that she's already made her choice. And it's not you. I let him go, and he fell back into his chair, straightening his shirt. My heart burned, but my mind stayed cold. I realized that Jordan was playing with me, provoking me, and if I followed his lead, he'd win. This isn't over, I said, leaning in close to him. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. He smiled, but a flicker of worry flashed in his eyes. Be careful, old friend. In war, there are always losses. Ask yourself, are you ready to lose even more? I walked away, leaving him there with that smug smile. But inside, I already knew. This war was just beginning. Days passed, but the feeling that something was deeply wrong only grew stronger. After my meeting with Jordan, I tried to gather my thoughts, but his words lingered in my mind like poison. Could I really lose everything because of one person I once called a friend? And, more importantly, was there anyone I could still trust? When I got home, I saw Alice at the kitchen table. She looked far too calm, as if everything that had happened was just a figment of my imagination. We had barely spoken lately, and the silence was worse than any argument. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up from her phone. Her voice was even, but I could no longer hear warmth in it. "Fine," I replied, but she caught the tone in my voice. Suspicion flashed in her eyes, but she said nothing. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my messages. A few caught my attention. "Heard you're plotting something against Jordan? What's going on?" wrote one friend. "Why are you acting so weird?" "We've always been on the same side," said another. I read through the messages one by one, and it became clear that Jordan had already started his next move. He had been talking to mutual friends, twisting the situation to his advantage. He was manipulating them, painting a picture where I was the villain. The next day, I met my friend Tom at a bar. He looked tense and avoided my gaze. "Tom, what's going on? Why is everyone acting so strange?" I asked, trying to gauge just how far Jordan had gone. Tom looked at me and sighed. "Man, did you really go against Jordan? You know how he twists things. I don't even know who to believe anymore. What exactly did he tell you?" I tried to stay calm, but a storm was raging inside me. "He said you're trying to ruin his life, that you're jealous of him because he achieved things you couldn't." And honestly, he sounded convincing. I leaned forward, feeling the blood rush to my face. "And you believe him? Tom, we've known each other for over 10 years. Have I ever let you down?" Tom looked away. "No, but..." "There's no but. Jordan is using you. He's manipulating all of us. Don't you see that?" Tom sighed and reached for his drink. "I just want things to go back to the way they were. No games, no drama." When I got home, Alice was sitting on the couch, talking on the phone. Her voice was low, but there was tension in it. She abruptly went quiet when she saw me and ended the call. "Who was that?" I asked, trying not to sound overly suspicious. "No one important," she replied, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew I didn't believe her. I decided not to press the issue. But later that night, after she fell asleep, I took her phone and began scrolling through her recent calls. The number was hidden, but in her message history, I found something that made me freeze. "Jordan, we need to meet. He's starting to suspect something." I sat there with the phone in my hands, feeling anger consume me. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning something bigger, and I needed to find out what. Standing by the window, I watched as Alice, dressed far too elegantly for a casual evening, quietly left the house. Her stride was confident, but there was a hint of anxiety in her eyes. She glanced around as if checking if anyone was watching and quickly got into her car. The engine started, and she disappeared around the corner. This wasn't the first time she had acted so suspiciously. More and more often, her phone vibrated late at night, and her conversations were short and guarded. I knew it was time to uncover the truth. I got into my car and followed her, keeping a safe distance. The streets were dark, illuminated only by the occasional streetlight. She drove toward the city, where Jordan's office was located. When I saw her car stop in front of one of the skyscrapers, I parked on a nearby street. Alice entered the building, glancing around nervously. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. Waiting in the car was pointless. I got out and headed toward the entrance. The security guard in the lobby looked tense, but that didn't stop me. I said Jordan's name, and he didn't even try to stop me. The elevator carried me to the top floor. The corridor was silent. A faint light under the door of Jordan's office indicated where they were. I approached and heard voices. Their voices. "We need to act quickly," Jordan said, his tone firm and cold. "He's starting to suspect something." "I've already done everything I could," Alice replied, and I felt my heart tighten. Her voice sounded like she was involved in something far greater than just an affair. "But if he finds out..." "He won't find out," Jordan interrupted her. "I have a plan. We'll destroy him completely. His career, his reputation, everything will be in our hands." I froze, listening. My breathing grew heavy, and I barely stopped myself from bursting into the room. They were planning something far bigger than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about everything I had ever worked for. When the door opened, I stepped back into the shadows. Alice and Jordan exited together. Her face was pale, while his was smug. They didn't notice me as they got into the car. Jordan was behind the wheel, and Alice sat beside him. I waited until they drove off, then returned to the office. The light in the room was still on. Papers were scattered across the desk. I quickly began to sift through them before anyone could return. What I found made my blood run cold. There were contracts, emails, and financial statements. All of them were forged but signed with my name. Jordan and Alice were creating a scheme that could destroy my reputation forever. They were using my name to accuse me of financial fraud and embezzlement of corporate funds. My anger knew no bounds. I photographed the documents with my phone and quickly left the office. This time, I wasn't going to let them win. Did they think I would just stand by and watch as they destroyed my life? No. This was war now. The darkness wrapped around the room, but I sat in my chair, staring intently at the glow of the screen. The photos of the documents I had taken in Jordan's office were laid out before me. Contracts, forged reports signed in my name, emails filled with fake accusations, all of it pieced together into a puzzle meant to destroy my life. Their plan was meticulous. With these evidences, they could not only ruin my career but also make me the target of criminal charges. But I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. By dawn, I was already in the office of a lawyer I had known since my university days. Dave was someone I could trust. His face, always serious, looked even more tense as he reviewed the photographs. "This is serious. Very serious," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If this goes to court, you could be charged with financial crimes. But luckily, we have these photos. Will they be enough?" I asked, feeling the weight of each word leaving my chest. Dave nodded, but his expression remained grim. "It's strong evidence, but you need to be ready for a fight. Jordan and Alice won't back down. If they've gone this far, they probably have a backup plan in case you try to stop them. What do you suggest?" I leaned forward, feeling adrenaline surge through me. "First, we need to go to the police. But we'll do it quietly. We need investigators on our side to gather even more evidence. If we act hastily, they could destroy the remaining proof or even turn the situation against you faster." The police station was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. The officer taking my statement listened intently without interrupting. His face betrayed no emotion, but I could see him noting every detail I shared. "This is a serious matter," he said when I finished. "We'll open an investigation, but you'll need to provide more evidence. These photos are a good start, but we need something that directly ties these documents to Jordan and your wife." "They won't let this go easily," I replied. "They're already planning their next move." The officer nodded. "We'll start working on this immediately, but be prepared. If this is as serious as you say, they'll have to answer for it, and they'll try to defend themselves." At home, everything seemed as normal as ever, but the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm wouldn't leave me. Alice was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Her face looked focused, but when she saw me, she forced a smile. "You look exhausted," she said, pouring me a cup of coffee. "Work," I replied curtly. She had no idea that I knew where she had gone last night and that I now had a plan. The next day, I received a call from Dave. "We've found something interesting," he said, and his voice sounded more upbeat. "It seems the email address used to send those messages is tied to one of Jordan's company servers. This directly implicates him in creating this scheme. Is this enough to act on?" I asked, hoping for a positive answer. "It's a strong start," he replied, "but we'll need more to hold up in court. Keep your guard up. They're going to try and provoke you." That evening, I got another call. This time, it was from an unknown number. "Hello, old friend," Jordan's familiar voice said. His tone was calm, but it was clear he was up to something. "Do you think you're going to win this game?" "I already have," I replied, holding back my anger. "Oh, really? Think again. Are you sure you can trust everyone around you? Alice, for instance. Do you even know whose side she's on?" He laughed and hung up. That laugh echoed in my head for a long time, a stark reminder that I was far from victory. When Alice returned home, she looked unusually tense. She tried to appear calm, but her eyes betrayed her. She barely spoke during dinner, only mechanically answering questions and idly playing with her fork. I knew something significant had happened. A few hours earlier, I had received a call from the detective working on our case. "We've decided to speak with your wife," he said calmly but firmly. "Her involvement in the scheme is obvious, but we want to give her a chance to tell the truth. If she agrees to cooperate, it could be the key to this case." I didn't respond, but the call left me deep in thought. Would she betray Jordan to save herself? Or would she remain loyal to her ally, no matter the consequences? The next morning, Alice left the house earlier than usual. Her phone was left on the kitchen table. This was uncharacteristic of her, and I knew immediately that she was hiding something. When I picked up the phone, it was locked. But that didn't matter. I was more interested in what she had done the night before. Alice sat across from two detectives in a small interrogation room. She looked tense, but she kept her composure, trying not to show weakness. On the table before her were the photographs from Jordan's office, as well as documents proving her involvement in the conspiracy. "Mrs. Black," one of the detectives began, flipping through the papers, "we know you've been working with Jordan. We also know his goal is to destroy your husband, and we need your help to stop him." "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to sound confident. But her voice trembled, and the detectives didn't miss it. The second detective leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "If you continue to lie, we'll have no choice but to use this evidence against you. And then you'll risk losing everything. Are you ready for that?" Alice stayed silent, avoiding their gaze. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The room was filled with tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. "Do you think Jordan will protect you?" The detective pressed on. "Do you think he won't betray you when things get critical? Think again. His only concern is his own benefit, and you're just a tool to achieve his goals." That night, Alice came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, with traces of tears visible in her eyes. She didn't say a word, simply sitting on the couch and staring at the wall. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't answer, only shaking her head. Her silence was worse than any words. "Do you know that Jordan is using you?" I continued, my words making her flinch. "He doesn't care about you. He only cares about himself. And when this all blows up, he'll leave you to face the consequences alone." "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice so quiet I could barely hear her. "Then explain it to me," I shouted, rising from my seat. "Explain why you became part of this. Explain why you're trying to destroy my life alongside that scumbag." Alice lifted her head, and I saw something new in her eyes, a mix of fear and pain. "Because I had no choice," she finally replied. "He threatened me. If I didn't help him, he'd destroy everything I cared about. And I thought I was doing this to protect us." "Protect us?" I laughed, unable to hide my sarcasm. "You think this is how you protect us? Do you even realize what you've done?" Alice broke down into tears. I didn't know how to get out of it. He had me trapped. Her tears didn't stir any pity in me. I couldn't trust her anymore, even if her words were true. A faint ring from the phone broke the morning silence. Alice, still wearing her silk robe, picked up the call but immediately left the room so I couldn't hear. I watched her silhouette disappear through the door, my suspicions only growing. Last night, she had almost confessed everything, but now she acted as though nothing had happened. Her conversation was short but emotional. "I understand. Yes, I'm ready. I'll tell them everything if you promise to protect me." Her voice was anxious but resolute. She had made her decision, to break her silence and testify against Jordan. A few hours later, she was at the police station, sitting in front of a detective. Her hands nervously clutched a glass of water as she recounted everything. How Jordan had forced her to take part in the scheme, how he threatened to expose her secrets if she refused, and how she had become entangled deeper and deeper, not realizing there was no way out. "He promised I'd be safe if I did what he said," she said, swallowing tears. "But I couldn't live with it anymore." The detective nodded, taking notes. "You understand that your testimony is key evidence in this case, but it also makes you a target. Are you prepared for that?" Alice was silent for a few seconds before nodding. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop him. He has to pay for everything he's done." Meanwhile, Jordan received a message. An unknown number, but the meaning was clear. She betrayed you. She gave testimony. His eyes filled with rage. He threw the phone onto the table and grabbed his head. "Damn it, Alice," he muttered. He knew he had to act immediately. If the police got all the evidence, his career and freedom would be destroyed. But he also knew there was still time to fix it. That evening, when Alice came home, she was too quiet. Her movements were mechanical, and her eyes looked hollow. I sat at the kitchen table, trying to figure out what was happening. "You went to the police," I said, watching her reaction. She flinched but didn't deny it. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," she replied in a barely audible voice. "It was wrong. I made a mistake, but now I want to make it right. You think he'll just let it go?" I raised my voice. "Jordan isn't the type to go down without a fight. If you've turned against him, he'll find a way to ruin you." She looked at me, fear flashing in her eyes. "I know, but what else could I do?" The next day, it all began. Alice received a message. One word, "Wait." She knew who it was from. Jordan wasn't standing down. She tried to ignore him, but the next messages were worse. "You chose this game. You don't know how far I can go." Her hands trembled as she read them. She knew he was capable of anything. That evening, as we ate dinner, her phone rang again. I glanced at the screen and saw Jordan's name. "Don't answer it," I said, but she didn't listen. Her face turned pale as she picked up the call. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound confident. "Did you think this through before doing it?" His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of menace. "Do you think I'll let you ruin me?" "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she replied, but her voice betrayed her. "Oh, you will be," he said, and the call ended. The next morning, we found an envelope on our doorstep. Inside were photographs. Alice and Jordan in various situations. At restaurants, in his office, in her car. Along with them was a note. "You thought the police would save you? Think again." The morning started with a call from an unknown number. Alice grabbed the phone while I was still asleep, but her sharp tone quickly woke me up. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to sound strong, but her voice carried anxiety and panic. I raised my head and saw her face go pale. She put the phone down and froze, clutching it tightly in her hand. "What happened?" I asked, but she just shook her head. It's nothing," she said, but I could tell it was a lie. I stood and approached her. "Alice, what's going on?" "Jordan," she said quietly. "He started acting." A few hours later, I got a call from my lawyer. His voice was tense. "Have you seen the news?" he asked, and I felt a tightening in my chest. I quickly opened my laptop. On the front page of the local news site was an article with the headline, "Scandal Breaks. Alice Black and Her Secret Ties to Influential Men." The article featured the photographs we had found in the envelope, but now they were accompanied by fabricated details. Meetings supposedly held for financial fraud, affairs painting Alice not only as unfaithful but also as an accomplice to crimes. Jordan had used her as a shield to divert attention from himself, and now she was at the center of the scandal. "He wants to destroy me," Alice whispered when she saw the article. "He wants everyone to believe I'm the one behind all of this. And he's using you as a scapegoat," I replied, feeling my anger rise. "But we're not going to let that happen." That same day at the police station, the detectives looked concerned. "This complicates the case," one of them said, scrolling through the article. "Jordan knows how to play this game. Now, even if we present your testimony, it will look like an attempt to save face." "What am I supposed to do?" Alice asked, on the verge of tears. "I've lived in his shadow for years, and now he's making me out to be guilty of everything. We need stronger evidence that directly links Jordan to this conspiracy," the detective replied. "We could try digging into his financial transactions. He couldn't have pulled this off without support. If we find those connections, it could change everything." That evening, Alice's phone rang again. It was Jordan. "Did you like the photos?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge of anger to it. "Did you really think you could betray me and get away with it?" "What do you want?" she asked, gripping the phone tightly. "I want you to make a choice. You can end this now. Just tell the police that you were the mastermind behind all of this. I'll make sure you get minimal punishment." Or, his voice darkened, becoming menacing. Your life will become a living hell. She was silent for a few seconds before saying, I'm not afraid of you anymore. Big mistake, he replied, and the call ended. The next morning, the scandal escalated. Videos surfaced online showing Alice supposedly discussing plans for financial fraud. Her voice was faked, but at first glance, it looked convincing. Jordan was playing dirty, and now even the police couldn't guarantee her safety. We sat on the couch in complete silence, watching the videos over and over. It's fake, she said, but her voice was filled with despair. But everyone will believe it. We'll find a way to prove the truth, I said, gripping her hand. But even I began to doubt if we could stop Jordan before he destroyed everything. I sat in the dark, staring at the article that had taken over every local news outlet. Photos of Alice, doctored videos, accusations of corruption, all of it part of Jordan's carefully planned attack. He had made her the main target to deflect attention from himself, and now we were teetering on the edge of complete ruin. Alice sat beside me, her eyes red from crying. I feel like I've already lost, she whispered. He's turned my entire life into a nightmare. I squeezed her hand. You're not alone. We'll find a way to make him pay. We won't wait any longer. It's time to fight back. That evening, we decided to come up with a plan. Every resource we had at our disposal had to be used. Alice mentioned someone, Margaret, Jordan's former assistant, who left his company after a major falling out. She knows more than she's letting on, Alice said. If we can convince her, she might help us. The next day, we met Margaret at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She looked cautious, constantly glancing around as if afraid of being seen. Her voice was quiet but determined. Jordan is a dangerous man, she began. I worked with him longer than I wanted to. He's a manipulator who always thinks several steps ahead. If you're going up against him, be prepared. He'll stop at nothing. We need your help, Alice said. You know how he operates. You can give us the information we need to prove his guilt. Margaret hesitated for a few seconds before saying, There's one document. It's a contract he signed with a powerful associate. If you find it, it'll be a blow he won't recover from. That evening, we broke into Jordan's office. Margaret had given us a key card she still had from her time at the company. The office was empty, but the tension was almost palpable. Check his private office, Alice whispered as we entered. He always keeps the most important things close. We quickly began searching through the documents. The shelves were filled with papers, but nothing seemed significant. Finally, I found what we were looking for. Inside a safe hidden behind a false wall was an envelope. Opening it, I found a contract, a document confirming illegal financial transactions between Jordan and one of his business partners. This is it, I said, showing the document to Alice. But suddenly, we heard a noise. The office door opened, and Jordan walked in. His face was full of fury. You think you can beat me? He said, stepping closer. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Alice stepped forward. This time, you're going to lose, Jordan. We have all the evidence. He laughed, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. Evidence? You think that's going to stop me? You have no idea how far I can go. We fled the office, taking the documents with us. But now we knew that Jordan would stop at nothing to prevent us from exposing him. The night was dark, with only the moonlight piercing through thick clouds. We sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread out before us like a battlefield. The contract, financial reports, and emails. Everything that could destroy Jordan was now in our hands. But it was also everything that could put us at risk. He already knows we found this, Alice said, clutching her coffee cup to steady her trembling hands. Her voice was calm, but her eyes glimmered with anxiety. He's not going to leave us alone. That's why we need to make this public, I replied. If we go to the media, he won't be able to hide the truth. His influence won't be enough to silence the press. But what if he? Alice trailed off, her words hanging in the air. She was afraid to say what we both knew. Jordan would stop at nothing to protect himself. The next morning, we arranged a meeting with a journalist I knew personally. Sarah was one of the best in the field, and her reputation was impeccable. We met at a small cafe, far from prying eyes. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked, looking at us intently. If this is as serious as you say, The consequences will be massive. That's exactly why we came to you, I replied. These documents prove that Jordan was involved in illegal financial operations, and now he's trying to frame Alice. This is a story that needs to be told. Sarah reviewed the papers, and I saw her expression change. This is serious, she said, jotting down notes. But you realize that once this goes public, your lives will never be the same again? Alice looked at me, and I saw determination in her eyes. My life is already ruined, she said. Now, I just want to try to set things right. Within hours, the article was ready. Sarah did a brilliant job. She presented all the evidence, exposed Jordan's scheme, and detailed how he had used Alice as a scapegoat. The article was so compelling that we knew if it went to print, Jordan wouldn't be able to avoid justice. We're publishing this tomorrow morning, Sarah said, closing her laptop. But be careful. If Jordan finds out, he'll do everything he can to stop you. That evening, we returned home. The tension was so thick it felt suffocating. We knew the next few hours would be critical. The phone rang, and I answered. It was Jordan. I know what you're planning, he said, his voice cold as steel. You think you've won? You have no idea how far I can go. You're not going to destroy us this time, I replied, trying to mask my fear. The truth is coming out, and you can't stop it. He laughed, but there was anger in his tone. Think twice before you take this step, because if you do, you'll lose everything. The next morning, the article went live. The headline blared across the front page, High-level scandal, Jordan exposed as manipulator and fraudster. We sat in the living room, watching the news as the story spread. Suddenly, the door burst open. 2 men in black suits entered the room. You've made the biggest mistake of your life, one of them said, stepping closer. We had woken at dawn, hoping this would be the turning point. The article about Jordan had already gone viral, sparking outrage. We read the comments. People demanded answers, justice, and Jordan's name quickly became synonymous with corruption. But alongside this, we knew he wouldn't stay silent. The phone rang early. It was Sarah. We have a problem. Sarah's voice was filled with urgency. Jordan isn't staying silent. His lawyers are claiming all your evidence is fake, and they've already started a campaign against us. Did you know he has friends in high places in the media? My heart sank. What does this mean for us? It means he's preparing to strike back, she said. And if we don't find a way to protect ourselves, we'll lose everything. Within hours, we saw Jordan's machine at work. Leading news agencies began publishing articles that cast doubt on our evidence. The headlines were manipulative, fraud, or personal grudge? Who's really behind the attack on Jordan? One television channel aired an interview with one of Jordan's close friends, who claimed we were just bitter losers, trying to attract attention. Every word was aimed at discrediting us and making us look like liars. This is only the beginning, Alice said, sitting on the couch. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. He wants to force us to give up, but we can't let that happen. We decided to act. We needed someone to corroborate our story. I thought about all the people Jordan had used in his schemes, but most were either too scared or already bought off. Margaret, Alice suddenly said. She knew more than she let on. If we can convince her to go public, it could change everything. That evening, we met Margaret. She looked frightened, but we knew she held the key to our defense. I can't do this, she said, looking at us with desperation. Jordan won't forgive me. He'll destroy me. He's already destroying us, Alice replied. And if we don't stop him now, he'll keep ruining other people's lives. Margaret was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. Fine, but I'll do it on my terms. I want to remain anonymous. The next morning, we recorded an interview with Margaret. Her testimony was undeniable. She detailed how Jordan used his connections to manipulate the media, create fake evidence, and blackmail his subordinates. Her words were clear and convincing. We handed the recording to Sarah. She promised to publish it immediately. This is our last chance, she said. If this doesn't stop him, nothing will. When the interview went live, we were back in the spotlight. People began to doubt Jordan's version of events, and even those who had supported him started to distance themselves. But with the attention came new threats. The phone rang late at night. It was Jordan. You've crossed the line, he said, his voice brimming with rage. This isn't just a game anymore. You're going to pay for everything. I could hear the real threat in his words, but it only strengthened my resolve. The evening air was heavy with tension. Alice and I sat in the living room, trying to figure out how to counter the new wave of lies Jordan was spreading. Articles continued to attack us, painting Alice and me as liars and Margaret as a fabricated figure working to destroy Jordan's career. He controls everything, Alice said, nervously gripping her coffee cup. It feels like we're powerless. I looked at her, searching for words to comfort her, but inside, I was boiling with anger. We were fighting a shadow we couldn't grasp. Just then, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said cautiously. "I need to speak with you." The voice on the other end was quiet but resolute. "I can't stay silent anymore. We need to meet. I have information that can destroy Jordan." An hour later, we were sitting in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The person who wanted to meet us remained in the shadows, their face hidden under a cap. But when they looked up, I recognized him. It was Richard, one of Jordan's closest partners, someone who had always stayed in the background. "You're probably wondering why I'm here," he began, his voice tense as he looked at us. "But I can't stay silent anymore. Jordan, he's crossed the line. And now he's prepared to destroy you, even if it means losing everything. Why have you decided to help us?" Alice asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Richard sighed. "Because I'm a victim too. Jordan used me, just like he's used everyone else. He forced me into illegal activities, promising it would stay between us. But now that he feels threatened, I know he'll make me his next target. What can you give us?" I asked, trying to gauge if he could be trusted. Richard pulled a flash drive out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "On this drive are recordings of our conversations. There are audio files where he discusses financial fraud, blackmail, and even how he fabricated evidence against you to discredit your article. But you need to be careful. If he finds out I gave this to you, I won't live to see another day." We returned home late that night. All the doors were locked, but the feeling of danger lingered. I plugged the flash drive into the laptop, and we began going through the files. The recordings were clear. Jordan's voice was calculated and ruthless. In these conversations, he laid out his entire strategy, from manipulating the media to intimidating his subordinates. "This is it," Alice said, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is exactly what we need to prove his guilt." "We need to act quickly," I replied, "before he realizes we have these recordings." But before dawn, it had already begun. Alice's phone rang. It was Jordan. "I know you met with Richard," his voice was calm, but every word carried a threat. "Do you really think these recordings can destroy me? Think again. If you go any further, you'll regret it." Alice looked at me, her face tense. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We go all the way," I said, knowing there was no turning back now. The night was restless. I couldn't sleep, replaying the recordings we had gotten from Richard. Each one was filled with evidence that could not only destroy Jordan, but also expose his entire network. Alice sat beside me, silently sipping tea, trying to gather her thoughts. "This is bigger than I imagined," she said quietly. "All of this, these people, they were all playing by his rules. And now we're going to make sure those rules don't work anymore," I replied. We knew there was no room for error. Our next steps could change everything, or end our fight entirely. At dawn, we headed to Sarah's office. It was small but secure, perfect for working with such sensitive information. She listened to the recordings carefully, her face betraying no emotion, but her eyes burned with determination. "This isn't just an article," she said, pausing the recording. "This is a full-blown investigation. If we do this right, this will be the story that changes everything." "How long will it take?" Alice asked, her hands clenched tightly. "We can have it ready in a few days, but you need to be prepared. When this goes public, Jordan and all his allies will do everything they can to stop you." Those few days were the hardest of our lives. We lived in constant tension, knowing that Jordan was watching our every move. Several times, we noticed suspicious cars parked near our house, and once, we even caught someone trying to break in. But we didn't give up. The day of publication arrived. The article appeared on the front pages of all major news outlets. The headline screamed, Scandal of the Century: How One Man Controlled the System. The report included recordings, documents, and testimonies from Margaret and Richard. It not only exposed Jordan's schemes but also revealed how he used his connections in politics, business, and media to build his empire of influence. The reaction was immediate. People were outraged, demanding investigations and justice. Politicians who had previously supported Jordan began distancing themselves from him. His allies publicly denied their connections with him, scrambling to save themselves. But it was too late. Jordan tried to respond. In a public statement, he called it all lies and manipulation. But his words were no longer taken seriously. A few days later, there was a knock at our door. It was the detective handling the case. "Jordan has been arrested," he said. "But this isn't over. We're still gathering evidence to hold all his allies accountable." As evening fell over the city, Alice and I sat on the balcony, looking out at the twinkling lights. For the first time in a long while, we could breathe freely. "We did it," she said, though her voice carried more exhaustion than joy. "It was tough, but we made it through," I replied. "Now it's up to the system. They need to do their part." She nodded and turned to me. "But you know, even now, we'll always be looking over our shoulders." "Yes," I said, "but it's worth it. We broke the system that was destroying people. Our efforts had made a difference, but the question remains. Is this enough to change the world? Can truth and justice prevail when the system is so deeply corrupted? What do you think? Was it worth the risk for the heroes to fight this battle?"